Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another Dragon Ball Super video. We are doing another tier list video. I thought the first one that we did was pretty fun. We talked about the different set 16 archetypes and kind of ranked them against each other. And I kind of want to do a tier list again. This is also a topic I've wanted to talk about for a little while, and this is the most toxic leaders in all of DBS history. And I feel like the tier list format is a pretty good way to do this. So basically what I did for this video is I went through the banned and errated list and picked off all the leaders that were either banned or errated for this tier list. There's 18 different leaders. Some of them are going to be pretty surprising. You guys might not have realized they're errated. They're more so for like clerical reasons, so we'll talk about them kind of briefly, but they are part of this list. There are probably some other leaders I could have included for this, but again, I wanted like a strict criteria, so I just went with a banned and errated list. But we can definitely do more things like this where we cover more broad spectrums. Just let me know in the comments below if you end up liking this. But again, I thought the first tier list video was pretty fun, so we'll get into this one. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, many ways down in the description to do so. So yeah, let's get into this, guys. And sorry, I don't know why my ad blocker is not blocking these Walgreens ads, which is kind of weird. Hope it's not too distracting, but my hands get really dry in the winter anyway. But anyways, let's get into this. So first leader we have on the list here is this, I think it's set 1. It might be set 2. Is it set 1 or set 2 Bobbity leader that was actually errated? Now this is actually kind of interesting because this was printed where the once per turn actually covers the first word or two of the effect. Don't ask me what this leader does. I definitely cannot tell you off of memory, but this leader is on the errata list for that reason, because the once per turn covers the first word or two of the text. So as far as just like toxicity, we're putting this in the F tier because this leader has never seen an ounce of play. I don't even know on a casual level, maybe just, you know, back then in that day. But yeah, it is errated, so we did add it to this list. Next up though, we have a big hitter. We have Dark Broly. Okay, so this leader kind of comes after Vegex, which I think I'll move over because I kind of want to talk about them in tandem a little bit. So Vegex and Dark Broly were from a very similar era. They're both black decks that rely around, I guess, not so much overwhelm. Dark Broly kind of overwhelms in his own weird way. But Vegex came around first in set 10 with his structure deck, and he was just turbo broken. Like, he had to get hit on the ban list 5 different times until they eventually errated the leader to say that instead of bursting 5, he only bursts 3. So Vegex definitely had to be addressed way more times than Dark Broly. And I would say in the formats where Vegex was at much higher power, it was harder to compete with Vegex. There were not many decks you could play that stood a decent chance against Vegex. But Dark Broly was in a pretty similar state where once Vegex was finally nerfed into a point where it wasn't the de facto best black deck, Dark Broly was able to step up. And the fact that it produced literal 0 energy 30k battle cards that were not only 30k beaters, but they also had effects, that was just really tough to compete with. But there were other decks in the format. Like in that format, you had Mecha Frieza and I think King Piccolo were the 2 other popular decks in that format, and they were both very strong. Some would argue Dark Broly was a slight cut above those decks. So I feel like for toxicity, I would either put them both in A tier. I think that's fair, and I would put Vegex in front of Dark Broly, again mostly because it had to be addressed multiple times, and in the format where it was really OP, it was much harder to contend with than Dark Broly was. I might also consider doing Vegex in S tier and Dark Broly at the front of A tier, but this could change as we get a little bit later into this list for one leader in particular that I want to talk about, but we'll go through some other things first. So we have Sorba, and the reason I say Sorba is because the Frieza Wish leader was added to the errata list because Sorbet was not spelled correctly. Sorbet is supposed to have a T in his name, and on the unawakened side of the leader, it only has an E. So unfortunately, this leader never really got off the ground, and the kind of disrespectful thing about the leader is that Dende Wish came out and just did his whole thing better. Literally took his main deck engine cards, because the actual Dende Wish main deck cards were pretty trash, and it was able to take and house those Frieza Wish cards better than the actual Frieza Wish leader was able to. So we're gonna put this guy in the F tier. Goku Black. Goku Black is actually a really interesting case because he was errated when, I guess, like set 10 was coming out. Yeah, I believe set 10 was coming out. And Plan for Destruction was also banned because they were kind of taking a heavy look at ramp, and they were coming out with Zeno Cosmic Unison. Now, Zeno Cosmic Unison kind of introduced this new method of ramping into the game where if you ramp with Zeno's effect, you cannot ramp with other effects for that turn. There were some interesting combo decks coming out with Goku Black and Zeno Cosmic Unison where you can just generate a ton of energy really quickly, and your leader, I believe, would also be able to sacrifice the Zeno energy, so you'd be able to get like a permanent ramp via the leader's unerrated effect, if I'm remembering that correctly. So there was like a kind of a broken combo, so they ended up errating the leader to say the same thing that Zeno says. If you ramp with his effect, you cannot ramp with other skills for the turn. Now again, like when this whole thing came about, a lot of people were really scared about this Goku Black combo deck, but I actually did a video kind of going over the math with a friend of mine who was a math teacher, and the deck wasn't actually very consistent, but it was scary. The things it could do were definitely scary. So this is an errata leader that I don't think was going to have the crazy impact on the metagame that a lot of other people thought it would, but it was still something that I think was worth errataing just for like future proofing. But honestly, this leader needs a reboot more than anything. This is definitely one of the ones that needs a pretty dire reboot. I am really happy for you Goku Black players though that got this wish leader in set 16, because that should be a really solid deck. So I think for Goku Black, we're gonna put him in C tier, pretty average in terms of like impact in the meta. He was pretty decent in like the early days of the game, and he did kind of like stir up that scare around the set 10 time period. So C tier it's going to be. Then we have the yellow Goten leader. So this leader was actually errata because it has a searching through the deck effect, but the card didn't say shuffle your deck. Now honestly, I think anything that says search should just imply a shuffle, but they felt the need to errata and add search and then shuffle to this card effect. So yeah, unfortunately another leader that never was really too great. I'm actually gonna put this guy in D tier though, because there were some interesting like yellow 8 builds, I think back in like the set 4 set 5 days, because this leader can search out a yellow extra card, it can search out Planet Vegeta. That's kind of interesting, so I think it's a little bit better than these F tier leaders here. Anyways, going on to Icarus though. So we are going to be talking about the set 16 changes as well. Icarus, in my opinion, is basically banned. It's errated into unplayability. This leader though, I would not put into S tier if you guys are immediately thinking that. Definitely gonna go into A tier though, because once Mecha Frieza was hit, which we'll talk about next, this leader was essentially just the next best yellow leader, and that's kind of how yellow and blue to a degree are. They just play the best cards in their color. They don't usually revolve around archetypes. So even though you hit Mecha Frieza because it was the best yellow leader and no other yellow leader could compete, people just go to yellow next because yellow doesn't really revolve around archetypes. It just wants to play the best yellow cards possible, and the best leader to facilitate that is easily Icarus. So that's definitely going into the A tier in my opinion. Next up though, we are talking about OG Mecha Frieza that came out in the first draft box, I believe, or maybe the second draft. Yeah, I think it was the first draft box. So yeah, Mecha Frieza came out, and in set 2 he was pretty decent, but in set 3 there was a time period. It was only for one tournament, which is actually my first regional, is San Jose, I guess regional or pre-regional. I don't remember really if it was one of the first official regionals, but yeah, Mecha Frieza was 100% undisputably tier 0 at that event, and then it was only an event that the deck was at full power, because then it eventually got errated, and then no one really played it again after that. But yeah, so the 3 variants of the deck you could play at that time were Mecha Frieza Veggies, Mecha Frieza Apes, and Mecha Frieza GT, which sometimes could actually kill the opponent on turn 1, which is kind of wild, but Apes and Veggies were definitely the best ways to play that deck for sure. But yeah, Mecha Frieza, for the impact it had on the game at such an early time in the game's lifespan, I am going to slot this guy into S tier, even though, again, he wasn't really around for all that long, but it was only set 3 of the game. A lot of people were very happy with how set 1 went, but Mecha Frieza came out, and it really just put out a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. I really think that this leader, and another one that we'll talk about, definitely hurt a lot of people's local scenes, because of just, you know, how early in the game's lifespan we had a tier 0 archetype. A lot of people were definitely not too happy about that. But anyways, I want to talk about the Mecha Frieza reboot next. This one I think also has to go into S tier, which is pretty hilarious because they errated the original Mecha Frieza leader, and then they came out with a reboot leader. And the whole thing with reboot leaders is you expect it to be like a bit more balanced version of the original leader. And in one way it was, because it could only really abuse yellow extra cards, but the fact that it could draw on the unawakened side was a whole beast in and of itself, because that was just way more consistency than the old leader ever had. So even though you could technically rip yourself down to 4 life immediately with the old leader unerrated, the new leader just offered you the ability to stay on your front side. Maybe you're up against an aggro deck and you don't want to flip super fast. So yeah, and the fact that it had to be banned as the reboot version of the leader is pretty hilarious. And even though maybe I slotted into A, because the format that it was viable, it wasn't the only playable deck. It was, again, it was in contention with Dark Broly, King Piccolo, so maybe it's not worthy of S tier. Like, I would put it in S tier because of the fact that it was a reboot leader, theoretically supposed to be more balanced and had to be banned, but I could argue putting it in A tier as well, because the format, it was legal. It wasn't the only playable deck. It was one of the very strong decks, one of the top 3. But yeah, I think I'll put it in A tier, because the way I'm going to compare S tier in a minute, yeah, I think it makes sense to put this in A tier. So, all right, next up we have Peronga. So Peronga was errated around the same time that World Peace was errated, and this was the time of Year 2 Nationals, at least for North America, where Shenron ramp was way too strong. Basically, these decks would just ramp up to crazy amounts of energy, use World Peace to bring back crazy boss monsters, one of which was the Red, Green, Kaioken, Son Goku. And Peronga had a similar effect, I believe, but he got the same errata treatment as World Peace, where he can only revive a 3 cost or less, which made the leader a lot worse. But there was a very interesting Peronga veggies list that was, you know, pretty decent rogue tier for a decent while. That was a pretty cool deck. So for that reason, I'm gonna slot Peronga, I think, into C tier, because that deck was pretty solid rogue. We don't have anything in B tier yet, though. Maybe because it was actually a playable rogue deck, maybe this actually goes into B tier. I think that's gonna actually be the case, because it was actually playable. Yeah, like Goku Black was good in set 1 and 2, but even around the set 10 time, it didn't really have time to prove itself. Peronga was at least actually playable. And actually, I think people were playing Peronga ramp as well, if not mistaken. The most popular build was Shenron, but yeah, people were playing Peronga because it had the ability to revive a guy as well. I'm kind of just remembering that right at this second, but yeah, that B seems like a fair thing for that. Then we have Reboot Gohan. Okay, I think I'm going to do the rating first, and I think this is going to go into A tier, and I think a lot of you guys might be surprised that it's not going into S tier. The reason I'm putting it into A tier is because this was a deck that everyone absolutely hated to face, but it really wasn't that dominant in the meta. So the thing with this leader was it's very toxic because it created a very unfun player experience. And that's definitely going to be something you want to consider, both at competitive and casual levels. You know, competitive players will put up with it a little bit more than casuals, because competitive players are just going to play the best deck, and even though it's not a super fun format, they're just playing to win, so they don't care as much. But me as a competitive player, and I consider myself a very competitive player, I do care when the format's you know, fun or not fun. If it's more stale, if it's more tier 0, if it's not really decided by skill, that is a big problem for, I would say, a lot of competitive players. But of course, yes, this definitely is a big feels bad for casual players as well, because again, playing against this, losing on turn 1, turn 2, not very fun at all. I actually want to skip ahead to Cell Surge, because I think a lot of the reasonings as to why Reboot Gohan was toxic also applies to Cell Surge, because again, same thing, unfun player experience. It was never really overly dominant in most tournaments, but it was still a very good deck. You expected it at the top, you wanted to be sided and prepped for it, much like Reboot Gohan. So in my opinion, these things fall in very similar categories. And then we have the OG SS3 leader. Okay, so quickly going back to Mecha Frieza, in set 3 SS3 came out, and this leader freaking says untap 3 energy at the end of your turn. Like, Bandai really didn't pull any stops in the beginning of the game. Like, I guess technically there was a leader in set 1 that untapped 2 per turn. Then they said, okay, set 3, let's make a leader that untaps 3 per turn. But this leader was rogue at best, while Mecha Frieza was at full power at the San Jose event. But after Mecha Frieza was dealt with, SS3 was the leader. You had to play SS3 because there were just not that many good archetypes at the time, and the other colors were just way too underpowered. So basically what you had with SS3 was it could house every single, I guess, color pool in the game. So you had mono blue variants, you had blue green variants. These were kind of like your defensive wall type decks. You had blue yellow, which was your storm variant that could be very aggressive. And there was even a rainbow color variant that I think topped a regional here or there. I'm pretty sure it was literally all 4 colors, or all 5 colors plus black for Overrealm. That was a bit more of a fun variant, but still a decent variant nonetheless. And so yeah, at that time you really did have to play SS3, but there were still a fair amount of variants of the deck that you could play. So I'm going to put that in A tier. Even though this is another thing that I think really helped kill a lot of local scenes, is because right after Mecha, it went right to SS3. And while there were a lot of variants of SS3 you could play, it got very stale that it was the only leader you could play at that time. Alright, next up we have the big boy. This is the #1 leader that made me want to do this video, and that's Super Shenron. This thing is going smack dab in the front of S tier, and this is definitely like a bias thing for me because I absolutely hate this leader. This is probably my least favorite leader of the game and most hated format of the game. because it was so uninteractive. Like, there are plenty of other strategies here that are uninteractive, like Cell Surge, some variants of SS3, Mecha Frieza when they have a really broken start, but Super Shenron, man, like the fact that they just took a second turn was just like a real big like slap in the face, because you just really couldn't do anything while they were just going through their combo, and their turns definitely took the longest out of any turn in Dragon Ball Super. Use leader, search 2 Dragon Balls, draw 2 cards, Child's Wish, play Bulma, mill 2, rinse repeat, do all this stuff. Yeah, for me, definitely my most hated and, in my opinion, most toxic leader we've had in Dragon Ball Super. Interesting point here, though. Leave a comment down below which leader you think is the most toxic. Obviously, you might agree or disagree with my list here. That's totally fine. Let me know in the comments below which leader you think was most toxic. But anyways, let's move on to our Surge leaders. Okay, so we have Surge Goku and Surge Piccolo. We'll talk about these together because they were pretty much around the same format. These leaders were both severely broken. There were not many other decks you could play at this time. Like, I remember going to the Chicago Regional, one of the last few IRL events before COVID hit, and I played Surge Goku. Lots and lots of people played Surge Piccolo and Surge Goku. And other things I remember coming across the room, like Red Beerus here and there, but I don't think people realized how strong Goku was yet. And Hachiak, I remember playing that like 1 or 2 rounds. But yeah, the main thing was playing against Blue Green Piccolo and Surge Goku literally all day. So I'm going to slot these in like this. I'm going Piccolo in S tier, and I'm going Goku in A tier. Reason is, I think that Goku was, I don't really want to say fair, but it was the mid-range deck that other decks could actually play against. Whereas Piccolo always just played the most degen strategies, like Gogeta 7 Turbo, Victory Strike Turbo, just generic hand control. These were all variants of the deck that didn't really allow the opponent to play the game, as where Goku was a very overpowered leader, very overbearing leader, but at least your opponent's deck could still do whatever it was meant to do. You just had to get through a double Senzu for free, which was not really going to happen most of the time, but yeah, it is what it is. Anyways, finishing up here, we have Videl, which had to be errata just for a clarification of its effect. Gonna probably put it in C tier because I think there were some cool rogue decks you could play with Videl, but it's never really done much in any of the formats that it's been legal. You have like you have some really interesting SS4 Gogeta Xeno builds though, because you can play the Goku and Vegeta skill list that combo off with Videl. And then as far as mono green, it's really not all that impressive. So C, I could even see an argument for D tier. And then we have Yellow Broly. Yellow Broly, the Awakened Threat. This one is tough for me. This one's either middle-ish S tier or top of A tier, because for a long time this was the best leader, if not the best yellow leader. So I think what I'm going to do is probably put this in the front of A tier. Very arguable for S tier. So overall, guys, we'll go over our rankings here. In S tier, I definitely agree with Super Shenron, Vegex, OG Mecha, and Piccolo, just for the effects they had on their respective formats. These are just some of the most unfun formats in the game, really turned a lot of people off. A tier, these leaders they had very strong marks on their respective formats, but I wouldn't say they drove the game into like an unplayable state or a tier 0 state, at least for the most part. SS3 kind of arguable, but at least there were several different variants you could play, at least like 4 different variants. So yeah, I definitely agree with what's here in the A tier. B tier, yeah, Peronga was actually a playable rogue deck, so I think that's pretty cool. I think it kind of deserves it, the B tier slot. I probably could have just dropped F tier, but I feel like it's actually pretty appropriate. So C tier, yeah, Goku Black stirred some things up. Videl had some cool rogue builds, but was never really all that good. D tier, Goten for that small experimentation with Yellow Apes, but honestly, D and F could probably just be 1 tier with Frieza Wish and Babidi never really being much of anything. But anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this. I actually had fun going through memory lane with you guys. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.